The silence in the crystalline chamber was deafening. Commander Elena Vasquez had expected many things from humanity's first formal contact with the Galactic Alliance, but this crushing, suffocating quiet was not one of them. She sat at the curved obsidian table aboard the Alliance diplomatic station Nexus Prime, surrounded by beings that represented civilizations spanning millions of years. To her left, Ambassador Kethvar's crystalline form caught and scattered the chamber's bioluminescent lighting into prismatic rainbows across the walls. His species, the Kethran, had mastered faster-than-light travel when humans were still discovering agriculture. Across from her, High Counselor Zephyran of the Ethereal Collective floated in her containment field, her translucent form rippling with what Elena had learned to recognize as distress. The Ethereals had transcended physical form entirely 3 millennia ago, existing as pure consciousness within energy matrices. At the head of the table, War Prime Thok-Nael dominated the space. The Thok warrior's chitinous armor was scarred from countless battles across the galaxy's outer rim, each mark a testament to conflicts that had shaped interstellar politics for eons. His 6 compound eyes, each the size of Elena's fist, regarded her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Dr. Michael Harrison, Earth's chief xenobiologist and Elena's closest advisor, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The man who had spent 20 years dreaming of this moment now looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the universe. The holographic display hovering above the table showed humanity's classification file. Elena had read it dozens of times during the 3-week journey to the station, but seeing it projected here, surrounded by the galaxy's most powerful beings, made it feel entirely different. Species designation: Homo sapiens. Origin world: Sol 3 Earth. Technological classification: Type 0.9. Threat assessment: Category Red. Category Red, Elena said, breaking the silence that had stretched for nearly 5 minutes. In all our communications over the past year, you never once mentioned this classification system. Ambassador Kethvar's form dimmed slightly, a sign of embarrassment in his species. The classification protocol is sensitive information, Commander Vasquez. It deals with existential threats to galactic civilization. Existential threats? Dr. Harrison leaned forward, his voice tight with incredulity. We're barely a Type 1 civilization by your own measurements. We've had faster-than-light travel for less than 50 years. Our largest warship couldn't threaten a Class C mining station. That assessment, rumbled Thok-Nael in his deep, harmonics-laden voice, demonstrates exactly why you have been classified as Category Red. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Explain. High Counselor Zephyran's energy field pulsed, and when she spoke, her voice resonated directly in their minds. A form of communication that still unnerved Elena despite weeks of exposure. In the 47,000 years of recorded galactic history, Commander, only 7 species have received Category Red classification. What happened to the other 6? Elena asked, though part of her already dreaded the answer. 3 became extinct through their own actions, Ambassador Kethvar replied, his prismatic form shifting through darker hues. 2 transcended physical existence entirely, abandoning the material universe. 1. The pause stretched uncomfortably long. 1 became something we dare not speak of, Thok-Nael finished grimly. Dr. Harrison's tablet chimed with an incoming data packet. His face went pale as he reviewed it. Elena, you need to see this. The holographic display shifted, showing a complex timeline of human technological development. The progression curve was nearly vertical compared to the gentle slopes representing other species' advancement. Your species, Zephyran continued, achieved nuclear fission, spaceflight, digital computing, genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and quantum mechanics within a span of 100 Earth years. The average galactic species requires between 1,500 and 3,000 years for equivalent technological progression. Elena stared at the comparative charts. Humanity's timeline looked like an anomaly, a sharp spike in an otherwise predictable pattern of gradual development. Moreover, added Kethvar, your advancement shows no signs of slowing. Our xenosociologists project that humans will achieve Type 2 civilization status within 500 years. Most species require 10 to 15,000 years for such advancement. But speed of development isn't what earned you Category Red status, Thakanael interjected, his armored plates shifting with what Elena now recognized as anxiety. It's how you develop. The display changed again, showing human military history. Elena watched centuries of warfare compress into minutes, the evolution of tactics, weapons, strategies. Each conflict seemed to trigger cascading innovations that rippled through human society. Every major technological leap your species has achieved, War Prime Thakanael continued, has been driven by conflict, competition, or the explicit desire to overcome insurmountable odds. Your advancement isn't just rapid, it's weaponized adaptation. Dr. Harrison found his voice. Are you saying we're inherently violent? No, Doctor, Zefran replied, her energy field flickering with complex emotions. We're saying you're inherently unstoppable. And in a galaxy where the balance of power has remained stable for millennia, unstoppable is another word for catastrophic. Elena looked around the table at these ancient, powerful beings and realized they weren't just studying humanity. They were afraid of it. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, species that had mastered technologies humans could barely comprehend, were terrified of a species that still couldn't reliably predict its own weather. What does Category Red classification mean for us? She asked quietly. The silence returned, heavier than before. Finally, Ambassador Kethvar spoke, his crystalline voice carrying the weight of eons. It means, Commander Vasquez, that humanity's integration into galactic society will require extraordinary precautions. The secured briefing chamber lay buried 3 kilometers beneath the surface of Nexus Prime, its walls lined with quantum-dampening fields that could contain classified information from even the most advanced surveillance technologies. Elena found herself seated at a smaller, more intimate table, surrounded by only the Alliance's highest-ranking military and scientific advisors. General Vextar dominated one side of the table, his serpentine form coiled in the complex mathematical patterns that his species used for deep contemplation. The Vexhai had evolved from ambush predators on a world where thinking 3 moves ahead meant survival, and their strategic minds were legendary throughout the galaxy. Vextar's 6 compound eyes, each capable of independent focus, regarded Elena with what she could only describe as professional terror. Commander Vasquez, Vextar began, his translator rendering his sibilant speech into crisp English. In my 4 centuries of military service, I have analyzed the combat capabilities of 237 distinct species. Never have I encountered data that fundamentally challenged my understanding of warfare itself. Dr. Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The xenobiologist had spent the morning reviewing preliminary Alliance scientific databases, and his usual enthusiasm for alien contact had been replaced by something approaching existential dread. Show them the progression charts, High Counselor Zefran suggested, her energy field flickering with complex patterns that Elena had learned indicated deep concern. The chamber's holographic systems activated, filling the air with a 3-dimensional timeline of technological development. Elena watched as species after species followed remarkably similar curves, gentle slopes representing thousands of years of gradual advancement. Then came humanity's timeline. It wasn't a curve. It was nearly a vertical line. Your species, Vextar continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, achieved controlled nuclear fusion, manned spaceflight, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and genetic engineering within a span of 1 Earth century. The average galactic species requires between 12 and 18 centuries for equivalent technological progression. Elena stared at the comparative data. We had strong motivation. 2 world wars, a Cold War, competition between nations. Precisely the problem, interrupted Ambassador Kethvar, his crystalline form shifting through darker spectrums. Your technological advancement is driven by conflict, not just influenced by it, fundamentally dependent upon it. The holographic display shifted, showing a detailed analysis of human innovation patterns. Elena watched decades of progress collapse into moments. Radar developed for war, computers advanced for code breaking, rockets perfected for weapons delivery, the internet born from military communication needs. Dr. Harrison, Counselor Zephran addressed the xenobiologist directly, her mental voice carrying undertones of something approaching pity. Your people went from discovering fire to splitting atoms in approximately 12,000 years. The Ethereals required 47,000. The Kethran needed 62,000. The longest-lived species in our database took 93,000 years for equivalent development. Dr. Harrison found his voice, though it came out strained. We're efficient learners? You're adaptive weaponizers, Warprime Thakanael corrected, his massive form shifting as his armor plates adjusted to accommodate his emotional state. Show them the warfare analysis. The display changed, presenting a comprehensive study of human military history. Elena watched her species' conflicts play out in fast-forward. Primitive spears giving way to bronze weapons, cavalry charges evolving into tank warfare, aerial combat development, nuclear deterrence theory, cyber warfare capabilities. Every conflict your species has engaged in, General Vextar explained, has fundamentally altered the nature of warfare itself. You don't just fight wars, you reinvent the concept of fighting. When faced with superior opponents, most species negotiate, retreat, or accept defeat according to established protocols. Humans, added Kethvar, innovate. They treat impossible odds not as obstacles to be avoided, but as puzzles to be solved through radical redesign of the entire problem space. Elena studied the data, watching pattern after pattern emerge. Human responses to overwhelming force. Guerrilla tactics when facing superior armies, asymmetric warfare against technological advantages, psychological operations against numerically superior enemies. The Alliance has fought wars, Thakanael rumbled, his deep voice carrying harmonics that spoke of ancient battles. But they are civilized affairs, predetermined rules of engagement, agreed-upon casualty thresholds, established victory conditions. War as structured negotiation through applied force. Dr. Harrison looked up from his tablet, his face pale. You're saying we fight dirty. We're saying you fight effectively, Vextar corrected. Your species possesses strategic concepts that translate directly into victory regardless of cost, acceptable collateral damage, and necessary sacrifice for the greater good. These are not merely tactical positions. They represent a fundamental worldview that the Alliance has never encountered. The chamber fell silent as Elena absorbed this information. She thought of humanity's greatest triumphs. Defeating fascism, landing on the moon, eradicating diseases, pushing the boundaries of science and exploration. Each achievement built on the same foundational principle that apparently terrified the galaxy's oldest civilizations. When humans encountered the impossible, they changed the rules. Your classification as Category Red, Counselor Zephran continued, stems not from malicious intent, but from adaptive capability. You don't just survive challenges, you evolve beyond them. And in a galaxy where equilibrium has been maintained for millennia, unlimited adaptive potential represents an existential variable that our models cannot predict or contain. Elena met General Vextar's multiple gazes steadily. So what happens now? The silence stretched uncomfortably long before the general finally replied. Now, Commander, we decide whether humanity becomes our greatest ally or our most dangerous enemy. And frankly, we're not certain there's a difference. The Alliance Historical Archives occupied an entire section of Nexus Prime, a vast complex of crystalline storage matrices and quantum memory banks that contain the accumulated knowledge of 47,000 years of galactic civilization. Elena walked through corridors lined with holographic displays showing the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of stars, and the evolutionary paths of hundreds of sentient species. Her guide through this labyrinth of information was a being known simply as the Keeper, a collective consciousness that had emerged from the merger of 12 different artificial intelligences over the course of millennia. Its physical form was fluid, shifting between liquid metal and crystalline structures as its attention moved between different data streams. The patterns are quite beautiful in their predictability, the Keeper said, its voice a harmonious blend of multiple tones as it manipulated the archive's holographic systems. the air around them filled with three-dimensional charts showing species development curves. Observe the consistency. Elena studied the displays floating around her. Every known sentient species followed remarkably similar trajectories. Slow, steady technological and social development spanning thousands of years. The curves were elegant, predictable, almost artistic in their uniformity. The Kethran took 62,000 years to progress from basic metallurgy to faster-than-light travel. The Keeper continued, highlighting one particular timeline. The Ethereals required 47,000. The Thok needed 51,000. Even the most rapid developers, the Zephyrian Collective, took 38,000 years. Dr. Harrison, who had been quietly absorbing the overwhelming scope of galactic history, looked up from his personal tablet. These timelines, it's like watching evolution in slow motion. Precisely, Dr. Harrison. Natural development follows natural laws. Social complexity increases gradually. Technological advancement builds upon established foundations. There are mathematical models that predict these progressions with 97% accuracy. The Keeper's form shifted to liquid metal as it accessed deeper data layers. And then, it said, with what Elena could only interpret as digital bewilderment, "We have humanity." The display changed, and Elena felt her breath catch in her throat. Humanity's development curve wasn't just different. It was impossible. Where other species showed gentle slopes spanning millennia, human progress appeared as an almost vertical line compressed into mere centuries. "This cannot be correct," Elena whispered, staring at the chart that showed her species' journey from stone tools to spaceflight in what appeared to be an eye blink of galactic time. "We verified the data 17 times, the Keeper replied, its form now adopting a more crystalline structure that pulsed with frustrated energy. "We consulted archaeological records, carbon dating, geological surveys, and even temporal scanning techniques. The measurements are accurate." Dr. Harrison was running calculations on his tablet, his face growing paler by the moment. "The acceleration is exponential. We're not just developing faster, we're developing faster at an increasing rate. But technological progression is not what earned humanity Category Red classification," the Keeper continued, its voice taking on a more ominous tone. "The classification comes from this. The archives around them transformed, displaying humanity's military history in devastating detail." Elena watched as warfare evolved from club-wielding primitives to nuclear-armed civilizations in a span that barely registered on the galactic timescale. "Your species' approach to conflict resolution is—" the Keeper paused, searching for appropriate terminology. "Unprecedented." Images flashed through the holographic displays. Ancient phalanx formations adapting to terrain advantages, medieval siege warfare innovations, the development of gunpowder tactics, naval warfare evolution, aerial combat emergence, electronic warfare, cyber operations, and theoretical space combat doctrines. When most species encounter superior opponents, the Keeper explained, they follow established protocols. Diplomatic negotiation, strategic withdrawal, conditional surrender based on predetermined acceptable loss thresholds. These approaches have maintained galactic stability for millennia. Elena watched human military history unfold, seeing patterns she had never noticed before. Each conflict didn't just end with victory or defeat, it fundamentally changed how future conflicts would be fought. "Humans," the Keeper continued, "respond to superior force with innovation. You don't just fight enemies, you redefine the conceptual framework of warfare itself. Consider your response to aerial bombardment during your 20th century global conflicts." The display focused on World War II, showing the London Blitz and the civilian response. Elena watched her ancestors not just endure bombing campaigns, but adapt their entire society to function underground, develop radar systems, create decentralized command structures, and ultimately turn defensive measures into offensive capabilities. Most species would have negotiated surrender after the first strategic bombing campaign, the Keeper observed. Humans went underground and invented new ways to fight back. Dr. Harrison looked up from studying the data. "We're persistent." "Dr. Harrison, you misunderstand the scope of the analysis," the Keeper replied, its form shifting through increasingly complex geometric patterns. Persistence suggests continuing existing strategies despite obstacles. Humans don't persist, they evolve. The historical display shifted to show guerrilla warfare tactics. Vietnamese resistance against superior technology, Afghan adaptations to mechanized warfare, urban combat innovations, asymmetric naval strategies. Every military engagement your species has participated in has produced tactical innovations that fundamentally altered subsequent conflict methodologies. The Keeper continued. You treat impossible odds not as barriers to overcome, but as design parameters for entirely new approaches to problem solving. Elena studied the patterns, her scientific training helping her see the underlying logic. Humans didn't just learn from defeats, they used defeats as inspiration for revolutionary new approaches. The Alliance has developed sophisticated mathematical models for predicting species behavior during conflicts. The Keeper explained. These models are based on 47,000 years of data and can predict outcomes with 94% accuracy. And with humans? Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. With humans, our predictive accuracy drops to 12%. Your species' responses fall outside all established parameters for rational behavior. The archives fell silent except for the subtle hum of quantum processors analyzing incomprehensible amounts of data. The Alliance fears humanity not because you are malicious, the Keeper concluded, but because you are fundamentally unpredictable. In a galaxy where stability depends on predictable responses to known stimuli, unpredictability represents an existential threat to the established order. Elena looked around at the vast archives containing nearly 50,000 years of galactic wisdom and realized that humanity had broken every rule that made galactic civilization possible. The question was, what would the galaxy do about it? 3 weeks had passed since the revelations in the archives, and Elena found herself increasingly isolated aboard Nexus Prime. The observation deck of the human diplomatic section had become her refuge, a transparent dome offering an unobstructed view of the star-filled void and, more immediately, the massive Alliance fleet conducting training exercises in the distance. Admiral James Rodriguez joined her at the viewport, his weathered face reflecting the distant lights of alien warships. At 63, Rodriguez was humanity's most experienced deep space commander, a veteran of the outer system conflicts that had forged Earth's first true space navy. They're afraid of us, Elena said without preamble, watching a formation of Kethran crystal ships execute a perfectly synchronized maneuver that looked more like an elaborate dance than military tactics. Can you blame them? Rodriguez replied, activating his personal holographic display. I've been studying their military doctrine for weeks, Elena. They haven't fought a real war in over 800 years. Elena turned from the viewport. What do you mean, real war? Rodriguez manipulated the display, showing footage from recent Alliance conflicts, if they could be called that. Elena watched what appeared to be elaborate ritual combats. Fleets approaching each other at predetermined distances, exchanging carefully measured amounts of fire, then withdrawing when casualty thresholds were reached. Look at this engagement from the Kethran-Vex high border dispute last year, Rodriguez continued, highlighting specific tactical movements. 18 hours of combat. Total casualties, 43 beings. The conflict ended when the Kethran reached their predetermined, acceptable loss threshold of 12% fleet damage. Elena studied the battle recordings in disbelief. This looks more like a negotiation than warfare. That's exactly what it is. They've evolved beyond total war, Elena. When Alliance species have conflicts, they follow strict protocols. Limited engagements, predetermined casualty thresholds, agreed-upon victory conditions. It's ritualized combat, warfare as structured diplomacy. Rodriguez switched to another display showing Alliance military academies. Elena watched alien officers learning tactics that seemed more focused on minimizing damage than achieving victory. They literally cannot conceive of concepts like victory at any cost, acceptable losses for strategic gain, or, he paused, his expression darkening, or what humans call necessary evil. Before Elena could respond, her communicator activated with an urgent priority signal. Ambassador Kethvar's crystalline form materialized in miniature above her wrist device. his prismatic surface cycling through rapid color changes that indicated extreme agitation. Commander Vasquez, Admiral Rodriguez, your immediate presence is required in the Crisis Command Center. We have a Category Alpha emergency. The Crisis Command Center was a sphere of pure chaos when they arrived. Holographic displays showed tactical readouts from across the galaxy, and alien commanders spoke in dozens of languages simultaneously, while translation algorithms struggled to keep pace. General Vextar's serpentine form was coiled in the complex mathematical patterns his species used during extreme stress. Void Reaper incursion in the Andromeda sector, he reported without preamble. Magnitude 7. They've been dormant for centuries. Elena had read about the Void Reapers in the classified briefings. Cybernetic entities that consumed entire star systems, converting organic matter into mechanical extensions of their collective consciousness. The Alliance's historical records classified them as an extinction-level threat. Fleet status. Admiral Rodriguez asked, immediately shifting into combat mode. 43 Alliance vessels destroyed in the first engagement. Warprime Thakanael rumbled, his armor plates shifting with agitation. Admiral Keftar ordered full retreat after losing 30% of his forces. Elena stared at the tactical display. 30% casualties triggered a retreat? Standard Alliance doctrine, Counselor Zefran explained, her energy field flickering with distress patterns. No strategic objective justifies losses exceeding 25% of available forces. The Reapers adapt to conventional tactics within hours, General Vextar continued. Our plasma weapons, energy shields, standard formation fighting. They've already incorporated countermeasures. Our computational models predict total Alliance defeat within 72 hours. Elena looked around the command center. Here were representatives of civilizations that had mastered technologies beyond human comprehension, species with millions of years of accumulated knowledge, and they were discussing surrender after losing one battle. Let us help, she said quietly. The command center fell silent except for the hum of quantum processors and the distant vibration of the station's gravity generators. Absolutely not, Counselor Zefran replied immediately, her mental voice carrying harmonics of pure terror. Your category read. Deploying humans in a combat scenario of this magnitude could result in consequences far worse than Reaper conquest. Admiral Rodriguez stepped forward, his military bearing commanding attention even among beings who had never seen his species before. With respect, Counselor, you're about to lose everything you've built over 47,000 years. And you're worried about protocol. If we unleash humans in warfare, Warprime Thakanael said, his deep voice carrying undertones of ancient fears, historical precedent suggests there may be no force in the galaxy capable of stopping you afterward. Elena met his compound gaze steadily. Prime, if you don't unleash us now, there won't be anything left for you to worry about stopping. General Vextar's 6 eyes focused on the tactical displays showing Reaper forces advancing through 3 star systems simultaneously. His calculations were running continuously, probability matrices updating every few seconds, all pointing toward the same inevitable conclusion. The mathematics are unforgiving, he admitted finally. Current Alliance tactical doctrine has a 0.3% probability of success against adaptive Reaper forces. And with human involvement? Elena asked. Vextar's form coiled tighter, his strategic mind clearly struggling with variables it couldn't quantify. Unknown. Our predictive models cannot process human tactical methodology. You exist outside our mathematical frameworks for rational behavior. Elena realized she was standing at a crossroads that would define not just humanity's relationship with the galaxy, but possibly the galaxy's continued existence. The Alliance faced extinction rather than deploy a weapon they couldn't control or predict. There's an ancient human saying, Admiral Rodriguez said quietly. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. Warprime Thakanael's armor plates shifted in what Elena had learned to recognize as grim resignation. And if the fire burns down everything we've spent millennia building, then at least something survives to rebuild, Elena replied. The alternative is watching everything burn anyway. The silence stretched as the Alliance's greatest military minds contemplated unleashing humanity upon the galaxy's greatest threat, knowing they might be trading one existential crisis for another. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Andromeda sector like a pack of wolves entering a sheep pasture. Elena watched from the bridge of the Terra Invicta as 16 human vessels arranged themselves in a formation that violated every principle of Alliance naval doctrine: asymmetric, unpredictable, and seemingly chaotic. "This is Admiral Rodriguez of the Terran Defense Force." The Admiral's voice carried across all frequencies, cutting through the Alliance fleet's confused chatter. "We are assuming operational command of this theater." The response was immediate and cacophonous. Admiral Keftar of the Kethran Fourth Fleet, his crystalline form projecting indignation, was the first to object. "Admiral Rodriguez, you have no authority." "Emergency Protocol 7 Alpha." Elena interrupted smoothly, reading from a data pad her legal team had prepared during the journey. "Any Category Red species may assume operational command during existential threats to galactic civilization. Check your own regulations, Admiral." Elena smiled grimly as she watched the Alliance commander scramble to verify the obscure protocol. Her legal officer, Commander Patricia Williams, had spent 48 hours buried in 47,000 years of Alliance law, searching for exactly this loophole. "That protocol hasn't been invoked in 12 centuries, General Vextar protested, his serpentine form coiling in mathematical patterns of distress. "Because you haven't faced an existential threat in 12 centuries, Admiral Rodriguez replied. "Now stand by for tactical coordination." While the alien commanders argued legal precedent, the human fleet was already moving. Elena watched her species do what it did best: adapt, improvise, and turn disadvantages into weapons. The Void Reapers had established a perimeter around the Kepler 442 system, their dark ships feeding on the mineral wealth of 3 asteroid belts while their cybernetic consciousness analyzed and adapted to Alliance military doctrine. They had faced plasma weapons, energy shields, and predictable formation fighting for 800 years of dormancy, and their quantum minds had calculated countermeasures for every known Alliance tactic. They were not prepared for humans. Elena watched from the tactical display as her ships implemented strategies no Alliance species had ever conceived. The first wave wasn't ships at all, it was information warfare on a scale the galaxy had never seen. "Commander Williams, initiate Protocol Pandora," Admiral Rodriguez ordered. Elena watched as humanity's greatest weapon against cybernetic entities was deployed: chaos. Hundreds of autonomous drones launched from the human fleet, each broadcasting different frequencies of white noise, contradictory tactical data, and most devastating of all, humor. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Commander Martinez from the communications station, "we're getting Reaper response patterns. They're confused." The Reaper's primary advantage was their ability to process and adapt to logical patterns. Human tactical doctrine, however, wasn't logical, it was creative. While the cybernetic entities tried to analyze the strategic value of broadcasting ancient Earth comedy routines directly into their collective consciousness, the real attack began. "Wave 2, launch," Rodriguez commanded. This time it was missiles, but not the guided projectiles the Reapers expected. These were kinetic penetrators equipped with quantum uncertainty generators, making their trajectories literally unpredictable even to themselves until the moment of impact. "Reaper shields are adapting," Martinez reported. "They're trying to calculate impact vectors." "Can't calculate what doesn't exist until it happens," Rodriguez smiled grimly. "Wave 3, execute." Elena watched as her species' true innovation was revealed. The third wave wasn't an attack at all, it was a question. Human ships approached the Reaper perimeter broadcasting a single message in mathematical language: "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" The response was immediate and catastrophic for the cybernetic entities. The Reaper's collective consciousness, designed to process and solve all problems through logical analysis, encountered humanity's gift to the universe: the unsolvable problem presented as if it had a solution. "Sir," Martinez called out, his voice tinged with disbelief, "the Reapers are requesting communication." Elena felt a surge of pride mixed with terror as she realized what her species had just accomplished. They had found a way to weaponize philosophy. The main screen activated, showing the alien command center where Alliance commanders watched in stunned silence as humanity redefined the nature of warfare itself. The Reaper communication was a harsh digital scream that the translators struggled to render into comprehensible language. "What are you?" The message finally resolved. "Your tactical methodology violates computational logic. Your losses are acceptable to you despite strategic disadvantage. We cannot process your behavioral patterns." Elena stepped forward, feeling the weight of representing her entire species. "We're humans. We don't follow computational logic. We follow emotional logic." "Explain emotional logic." "It's the logic that says some things are worth dying for. The logic that treats impossible odds as a challenge rather than a deterrent. The logic that turns disadvantages into advantages through pure stubborn refusal to accept defeat." The Reaper frequency went silent for nearly 30 seconds, an eternity for a cybernetic consciousness capable of billions of calculations per second. "Emotional logic is inefficient." "Efficiency isn't the point," Admiral Rodriguez interrupted. "Survival is, and humans have survived everything the universe has thrown at us by being efficiently inefficient." Another pause, shorter this time. "Proposal. Tactical withdrawal from this sector. These entities present computational paradoxes that threaten system stability." Elena exchanged glances with Admiral Rodriguez. They had won by being impossible to understand. "Withdrawal accepted," Elena replied. "But understand this, if you ever return to threaten any Alliance world, we'll show you what humans are like when we're actually angry instead of just mildly annoyed." The Reaper ships began disappearing into hyperspace within minutes, fleeing not from superior firepower, but from superior incomprehensibility. Elena watched the retreating enemy fleet and realized that humanity had just demonstrated something that would change the galaxy forever. Sometimes the most effective weapon against overwhelming logic was overwhelming illogic. In the Alliance Command Center, 12 species sat in absolute silence, trying to process what they had witnessed. Humans hadn't just won an impossible battle. They had won it by making the impossible seem reasonable. Part 6. The Aftermath. The victory celebration aboard the Alliance flagship Eternal Harmony was the most subdued celebration Elena had ever witnessed. The vast ceremonial hall, designed to accommodate dozens of different species in their natural environments, felt hollow despite being filled with representatives from across the galaxy. Atmospheric processors maintained separate environmental zones, aquatic chambers for the depth singers, low-gravity fields for the gossamer folk, high-pressure areas for the stone-bearers, yet every being present seemed diminished somehow. Elena stood at the center of it all, acutely aware that she was no longer being viewed as a diplomatic curiosity. The mixture of gratitude and terror in the assembled aliens' expressions had evolved into something far more complex. A recognition that the galaxy had fundamentally changed in the space of a few hours. General Vextar approached first, his serpentine form moving in the careful mathematical patterns his species used for formal occasions. His 6 compound eyes focused on Elena with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Your tactical methodology," he began, each word carefully measured, "achieved a victory that our computational models deemed impossible. The mathematical probability of success against adaptive Reaper forces was 0.3%. And yet here we are," Admiral Rodriguez replied, joining Elena at the center of the gathering. His dress uniform bore new scorch marks from the battle. Humans, unlike Alliance species, didn't have time for pristine ceremonial clothing when wars needed fighting. Dr. Harrison materialized from the crowd, his xenobiological training allowing him to navigate the complex social dynamics of multi-species gatherings. His face carried an expression Elena had never seen before, the look of a scientist whose entire worldview had been fundamentally altered. "I've been analyzing the battle recordings," Harrison said quietly, pulling Elena aside. "James, what we did out there, it wasn't just unconventional tactics. We broke the laws of physics through sheer bloody-mindedness." "Explain," Elena requested, though part of her dreaded the answer. "Those quantum uncertainty missiles shouldn't have worked. The mathematical principles underlying their targeting system are paradoxical. But they worked anyway because we believed they would work, and we convinced the universe to go along with it. Before Elena could process this revelation fully, Warprime Thakanael's massive form dominated their field of vision. The ancient warrior's chitinous armor bore the ceremonial markings of his species' highest military honors, but his voice carried undertones Elena had learned to recognize as existential uncertainty. The Alliance High Council has reached a decision regarding humanity's status, Thakanael announced, his words carrying across the celebration and reducing the ambient noise to whispers. Counselor Zephyran materialized beside him, her energy field flickering through patterns that Elena's cultural briefings had taught her represented formal political pronouncements. The Council offers humanity full membership in the Galactic Alliance. Zephyran began, her mental voice resonating directly in Elena's consciousness. With territorial concessions, resource allocation rights, and technological sharing agreements unprecedented in Alliance history, Elena felt the weight of negotiation settling over her shoulders. In exchange for military protection, Ambassador Kethvar stated bluntly, his crystalline form cycling through dark spectrums that indicated uncomfortable truths, and strategic consultation on matters of existential defense. Dr. Harrison looked up sharply from his datapad. You want us to be your enforcers. We want you to be our shield, Counselor Zephyran corrected, though the distinction felt academic to Elena. Against threats that conventional alliance methodology cannot address or comprehend. Elena studied the assembled representatives of galactic civilization, beings whose cultures had developed over tens of thousands of years, whose technologies bordered on magic by human standards, whose accumulated wisdom spanned eons. And they were asking a species that had barely achieved interstellar travel to protect them from the unknown. And if we refuse? Admiral Rodriguez asked, his military instincts recognizing the implicit threat beneath the diplomatic language. The silence stretched uncomfortably long before General Vextar responded. The Category Red classification would remain in effect. Humanity would be monitored, contained, if deemed necessary for galactic stability. Admiral Rodriguez laughed, a sound that made several aliens instinctively retreat. You try to contain humans? After what you just witnessed? Admiral, Warprime Thakanael rumbled, his ancient voice carrying the weight of countless battles. The attempt would be catastrophically unpleasant for all parties involved, which is precisely why we hope it never becomes necessary. Elena realized she stood at the fulcrum of galactic history. Accept the Alliance's offer and humanity becomes their weapon against the incomprehensible. Refuse and humanity becomes the incomprehensible threat they're defending against. But as she looked around at the representatives of advanced civilizations who had just been saved by a species they couldn't understand, Elena began to consider a third option, one that none of them had imagined. What if, she said slowly, instead of being your shield against the unknown, we taught you how to understand it? The celebration hall fell completely silent. Impossible, Vextar stated immediately. The mathematical frameworks for processing human tactical methodology do not exist. Then we'll create them, Elena replied, feeling the pieces of an unprecedented plan falling into place. Not human tactics for alien species, but adaptive thinking for everyone. Counselor Zephyran's energy field began cycling through patterns Elena had never seen before, colors and frequencies that suggested concepts beyond traditional Alliance communication protocols. You're proposing to teach the galaxy to think like humans, Kethvar said, his crystalline form brightening with what Elena hoped was intrigue rather than alarm. We're proposing to teach the galaxy to think beyond limitations, Admiral Rodriguez corrected, to treat impossible as a starting point rather than a stopping point. Elena watched as 47,000 years of galactic stability hung in the balance, waiting for civilizations that had perfected predictability to embrace chaos as a tool rather than a threat. The implications, Warprime Thakanael said slowly, would be unprecedented. Yes, Elena agreed. They would be human. 1 year later, Elena stood in the same observation lounge where humanity's galactic journey had begun, but the view beyond the transparent dome had transformed beyond recognition. Where once empty space had stretched between distant stars, now the sprawling structure of humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization dominated the horizon. The Impossible Academy. The Academy defied every architectural principle the Alliance had developed over 47 millennia. Instead of the elegant, predictable geometries favored by galactic civilizations, the structure seemed to grow organically, its sections adapting and evolving based on the needs of its occupants. Crystalline spires twisted around metallic spirals, while energy fields contained atmospheric bubbles housing dozens of different environmental zones. The concept is exceeding all projections, reported Dr. Harrison, now the Academy's first director of impossible studies. His hair had gained streaks of premature gray from the stress of teaching the galaxy's most advanced civilizations how to think like children again. We have students from 63 different species, including 5 that were previously considered too intellectually rigid for cross-cultural exchange. Elena nodded, watching through the dome as a group of Kethran youngsters collaborated with human children on what appeared to be a sculpture that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously. Progress reports? Beyond remarkable, Harrison continued, his voice filled with the wonder of a scientist witnessing evolution in real time. The Kethran student I mentioned last month. She just solved a mathematical theorem that had stymied her species' greatest minds for 3,000 years. Her approach? She treated the equation as a story that needed a better ending. Through the Academy's transparent sections, Elena could see ethereal consciousness entities teaching Thok youngsters how to phase shift through solid matter by approaching physics as an art form rather than a science. In another section, human teenagers were learning to manipulate quantum fields from Gossamer folk elders who had been convinced to try explaining their techniques through metaphor instead of mathematics. Ambassador Kethvar materialized beside them, though materialized was no longer accurate. His crystalline form had evolved over the year of exposure to human thinking patterns, gaining the ability to exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. The change wasn't technological, it was conceptual. The Alliance Council's latest assessment, Kethvar reported, his multidimensional voice creating harmonics that would have been impossible in his original form, indicates a 47% increase in cross-species innovation. Crime rates have dropped to historic lows across all Alliance territories. Scientific advancement has increased by 600%. Elena smiled, remembering the fear in alien voices a year ago. And the resistance movements? Declining rapidly, Kethvar admitted, his form shifting through spectrums that indicated embarrassed amusement. It's difficult to maintain traditional thinking patterns when your children keep asking why limitations exist in the first place. Admiral Rodriguez approached carrying a datapad filled with reports from across the galaxy. His uniform bore new insignia, not military rank, but academic credentials from the Academy's Department of Strategic Creativity. Latest frontier reports, he announced. The hegemony attempted another expansion into the Tau sector last week. Attempted? Elena asked, though the Admiral's expression already suggested the answer. 3 Academy graduates were stationed there as cultural liaisons. When the hegemony fleet arrived, the locals convinced them that invasion was an inefficient approach to resource acquisition. Rodriguez grinned. They offered to trade the hegemony advanced mining rights in exchange for technological cooperation. The hegemony accepted and is now sending their own students to the Academy to learn human-style negotiation. Elena laughed, a sound that had once made alien species retreat in fear, but now drew curious students from across the Academy's halls. Through the observation dome, she could see beings from dozens of worlds gathering to study human expressions, trying to understand the alchemy that transformed sound into joy. Status of the Category Red classification? She asked. Kethvar's multidimensional form brightened across several reality layers simultaneously, officially maintained for historical records. Practically, the Council has developed new classification frameworks, such as Category Catalyst, he replied, his voice carrying harmonics of concepts that hadn't existed in galactic language before human contact. For species that don't just change the galaxy, they teach it to change itself continuously. Warprime Thakinael's approach interrupted their conversation, though his movement patterns had evolved dramatically over the year. Where once he had moved with the rigid precision of a military machine, now his steps carried the fluid adaptability of someone who had learned to dance with uncertainty. "Commander Vasquez," Thacanael rumbled, his ancient voice now carrying undertones of something Elena had never expected to hear from him. Excitement. "My granddaughter has requested permission to establish the first Thak Warrior Poet Academy. She believes combat and creativity are two expressions of the same adaptive force." Elena studied the grizzled warrior who had once represented everything rigid about Alliance military thinking. "And your response?" "I volunteered to be her first student," he admitted, his armor plates shifting in patterns that would have indicated shame a year ago, but now suggested revolutionary joy. "It seems this old war prime has much to learn about fighting impossible wars." Through the Academy's vast halls, Elena watched the future of galactic civilization taking shape. Species that had followed identical development patterns for millennia were discovering entirely new ways of existing. The depth singers were composing symphonies in mathematics. The stone bearers were sculpting poetry from quantum foam. The gossamer folk were teaching physics through interpretive dance. "We've created something unprecedented," Dr. Harrison observed, watching a group of mixed-species students collaborate on a project that seemed to involve teaching stars how to change colors through persuasion rather than technology. "We've created something impossible," Elena corrected, feeling the truth of it settle around her like a comfortable weight. "And then we made it inevitable." Admiral Rodriguez checked his chronometer. "Speaking of impossible, I have a class to teach in 20 minutes. Advanced Paradox Resolution for Military Applications. Today's topic: how to win wars by convincing your enemies they were fighting the wrong conflict entirely." As he departed, Elena realized that humanity had accomplished something far more dangerous than any weapon they could have built. They had taught the galaxy that limitations were optional, that impossible was negotiable, and that the universe was far more flexible than anyone had imagined. Looking out at the Academy where countless species were learning to think beyond their evolutionary constraints, Elena understood that humanity's Category Red classification had been accurate, just not in the way the Alliance had expected. Humans were dangerous because they were teachers, and across the galaxy, an impossible truth was spreading like wildfire. The universe wasn't about following rules. It was about learning when the rules needed to change. In the Academy's central plaza, a monument had been erected, not to human victory, but to galactic possibility. Its inscription, written in the languages of every known species, read simply, "Here, the impossible learns to become inevitable." And in classrooms throughout the structure, young beings from across the galaxy were raising their hands and asking the most dangerous question in the universe. Why not? The galaxy would never be the same. And that, Elena realized, had always been the point.